This is Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast where we bring Jesus into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Sports Spectrum. So glad you're tuning into the show today. Vernon Fox is going to be our guest, the former NFL defensive back. He's also a high school football coach, played college ball at Fresno State. He's got a great story. This is a fun conversation with Vernon. Before we get to that, I want to tell you a couple ways you can get in touch with us. The first is our website, sportspectrum.com. It's a great place to go. Bookmark that website. Do you even bookmark websites anymore? I don't even know. But make sure you're checking that website out every single day. There's devotionals on there, a daily devotional. We also have every single podcast on there, 600 plus episodes, I should say. And then articles, stories on the intersection of sports and faith from the athletes, the coaches, the people in the sports world that you know, talking about their faith in Jesus. So check that out at sportspectrum.com. And then you can email me directly if you want to get in touch with us here at Sports Spectrum. My email address is jason@sportspectrum.com, jason@sportspectrum.com. Would love to hear from you. Any guest ideas, any thoughts, any stories that we should be covering, send me an email, jason@sportspectrum.com. Our show today is presented by Ronald Blue Trust, a great partner with us here at Sports Spectrum, and their advisors apply biblical wisdom and technical expertise to help their clients make wise financial decisions to experience clarity and confidence and leave a lasting legacy. Do you want to leave a legacy when it comes to your finances? Do you want clarity and confidence? Do you want your questions answered? We all have a lot of questions that we're asking here in 2020 into 2021 with regards to our finances. Ronald Blue Trust is a great place to go. Check them out at ronblue.com for all of your financial needs. ronblue.com. Vernon Fox is our guest here today on Sports Spectrum. Former NFL defensive back. He played in the NFL 8 seasons from 2002 to 2009 with the Chargers, the Lions, Washington, and the Denver Broncos. He went undrafted in the 2002 NFL draft out of college, where he had a great career with Fresno State. And he talks about going undrafted and how hard that was for him. Vernon was also a high school football coach from 2013 to 2019. He guided the Faith Lutheran High School in Vegas in Nevada to a 53-28 record and a Class 3A state championship in his 7 years as football coach. So this is a great conversation. We talk red light, green light. What's that effect mean when it comes to your faith? We talk about Mike Shanahan, Joe Gibbs, and Marty Schottenheimer, 3 legendary coaches that Vernon Fox played for in the NFL. And then we talk about tragedy and triumph and the struggles and getting through it all. Self-reliance versus God dependence. Vernon Fox joins us here today. It's a great conversation. Hope you enjoy it. Vernon Fox, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, how are you, Jason? Thank you so much for having me, man. This is a pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Thanks for coming on. Really excited to have you here. Let's start with 2020. Beginning of this year, before everything hit the fan, if you will, with all that took place in this 2020 year. Back in February, before the pandemic, you actually stepped down after coaching Faith Lutheran High School's football team for 7 seasons. You won a state championship there, had a lot of success. You called this one of the hardest decisions you've ever had to make. Can you kind of walk us through that decision, maybe stepping away from coaching and the role your faith played in making that decision?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, 100%. It was definitely a tough decision, and one that had to be fully directed by God, because it was something that I probably would not have done on my own. But it's much like my entrance into coaching. Wasn't something that was on my radar or something that I had kind of planned for. God just kind of opened up an opportunity, and, the situation was ideal in terms of having the opportunity to, do something that I loved and had done for the past 18 years, which was be connected to the game of football, but now in a different light in terms of connecting it with ministry. And so, again, it wasn't on my radar. It wasn't something I was looking for, but the opportunity came, and, I could clearly see that that's the direction that God was leading me in for that season of my life. And, I don't tell a lot of people this secret, but when I entered in, I kind of had like a back backroom deal with God. I was like, okay, I'll do this for like 2 years and then I'll just kind of move on and get back to my plans for my life. And at that 2-year mark, it was clear to me that, you know, my labor was not complete, and God wanted me to continue to do that. And as you mentioned, I was able to, you know, not just experience success, you know, on the football field and coaching and what we were doing with the program, but just in the lives of people and just seeing the impact that, you know, I could have as a coach, and, you know, that labor of love and that kind of vineyard of the ministry. And every year what I would do is I would kind of lay down before God at the end of the season and just kind of pray and say, okay, you know, is this what you want me to continue to do? Or is it something that we're kind of shifting? And I live by this red light, green light mentality with God. So as long as there's a green light, you know, I just go. And, you know, when there's a yellow light, I kind of, you know, slow down and yield, and I'm cautious and I try to listen. And if there's a red light, you know, obviously it's time to pivot. And, you know, that's kind of what happened this year. I spent significant time. So the season ended, you know, obviously in October, November. And, you know, I really just took a break away from everything and enjoyed my family for, you know, the Christmas season. And when January started, I just said, I want to commit like, you know, a full, you know, 21 days of, you know, fasting and prayer and just really seeking God concerning, you know, my life, my family. And the school was gracious enough to lend me that time to really come to a decision. And when I came out of that time, it was pretty clear that, you know, it was time to kind of move forward. Had no idea a pandemic was coming, none of that stuff. But,
Yeah.
You know, one thing I did know was that God was saying, okay, it's time to shift. And the other part of that was I didn't know exactly where he was shifting me to. I just knew that, you know, that season was completed.
So we have a lot of coaches that listen to the show, a lot of parents too, and people in the sports world. Walk us through, if in the best way that you can describe it, how you know when it's a red light and when it's a green light. Because I hear a lot of people say that, and I had to kind of walk through that on my own journey of knowing when the door was opening to pivot to something else and trusting in God to show you that. Can you kind of describe as best as possible how that looked for you?
Yeah. You know, in all honesty, this was probably one of the first times that I felt like the decision was kind of up to me. So almost like if you consider, you know, the story of Jesus, you know, walking on the water and him calling Peter out of the boat, like Peter asked, like, if it's you, bid me to come. And, you know, Jesus confirmed that it was him. He gets out of the boat. That was kind of one of the first walk on water moments where I had to like step out on my own. You know, in most cases, that red light, green light thing, God kind of just flipped the switch on me and I had no other option. You know, it's kind of like when my NFL career ended. The way that ended, people often ask, well, why did you stop playing? Or, you know, why did you retire? It really wasn't my choice. Like I was, you know, I felt like I was kind of in the prime of my career. Things were going really well. And, you know, a lot of new opportunities and doors had opened, and, you know, I was playing solid football. I was healthy, and God just kind of really just turned the lights off. And it was so distinct that I knew without a shadow of a doubt that God was kind of shutting me down, because every time I played for 4 teams in 8 years. So I was used to getting cut and, you know, getting opportunities to work out for new teams, getting signed off of waivers. I went through that process a number of times, and this time was different. Like the opportunity stopped. I mean, no workouts, no phone calls, no return phone calls, no return texts, all of these relationships I had, having been in the league for almost a decade. And God made it clear to me, like, hey, this is what I had to do because of the way I wired you. You're ambitious and you're going to chase as long as there's an opportunity. So I'm going to shut down the opportunities in order to show you that this is my red light. And so, you know, that's kind of been my motto. Like I just kind of know when God is showing me that things are shifting or changing, and then I pay attention to that. And it just requires a deeper time of prayer and really seeking his face. You know, that's kind of the key to it, is that I got to really seek his face. Even when I took the coaching job, like I asked them for, you know, I'm like, can you give me like a week to really just pray about this and think about it? Because they offered me the job and I wasn't looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I really try to spend that time seeking God, praying and asking for clarity and understanding on, what that next step looks like. And if you're diligent enough, he'll make it clear.
Tell me about what you learned in coaching and what makes a great coach. Again, we have a lot of coaches that listen, especially on the level that you coach, whether it's high school or even levels below that. And a lot of people who love Jesus and trying to integrate their faith and coach in a way that honors God. What were some of the things that you learned in your time coaching that you would pass on to someone else and say, this is how it worked for me, and some of the different things that worked for me to make a great coach?
Yeah, I think the thing here's the blessing in it is I had the amazing opportunity to play for some great coaches. I played for Marty Schottenheimer, for Mike Shanahan. My high school coach was still highly impactful in my life, even up until being an adult. My college coach was Pat Hill, and then one of the greatest coaches I had the chance to play for was Joe Gibbs. Just an extreme man of faith and just legendary in every capacity of what a coach looks like. And so for myself, what I tried to do was take every lesson I'd ever learned from coaches and apply that to the type of coach I wanted to be. So the negative things, I knew what I wanted to avoid, and I thought about how those things impacted me, and not just as an athlete, but just as an individual. Like, how those things at times scarred me, how they emotionally disturbed me, or how they, drove me to succeed. So I try to think about all of those things and integrate that into, what I felt like an effective coach looked like. And I really believe that coaching is a calling. I don't look at it as just something to do or, a profession. I look at it as a calling, and there's a high level of responsibility that comes along with coaching. You got to know that, leadership is influence, and you have the opportunity to influence lives. And so how are you going to utilize that opportunity? Because it can be for the good or the bad, but influencing is happening at all times. And then I kind of came up with this motto. I've had the chance to consult and teach in regards to leadership and those things, and coaches I really have a passion for. And one of the things that I like to say is that, you can be a good coach by, being a motivator, or you can be a good coach by being, a teacher. But a great coach combines those two models. You're not only able to motivate, but you're also able to teach. And when you can combine that, I feel like you can be a very, very effective coach. And in regards to my faith, that was the backdrop and foundation of the way that I coach, which made it easy for me to coach at a place like Faith Lutheran, because it was a Christian school. And so I didn't have to back away from any of that. Like, that was a huge part of the foundation of who we were. Every day we led in prayer, we ended in prayer. We had devotions, Bible studies, we were discipling the kids, so to say. So it was just an easy integration for me.
Let's go through a couple of those coaches you mentioned. You said Marty Schottenheimer, Mike Shanahan, Joe Gibbs. I mean, probably all three. I'm not sure. I don't have the exact stat in front of me, but I think they're all Hall of Fame coaches. Or if they're not, it wouldn't be surprising if by the time it's all said and done, those three are all in the Hall of Fame. I know Coach Gibbs is, and Coach Shanahan obviously has won Super Bowls, and Marty Schottenheimer is a legend. So give me one trait from each of those guys that you take with you even to this day. Let's start with Mike Shanahan.
So Mike Shanahan, I felt like he was like a general. That's one way I would correlate him. He wasn't a highly emotional person. He knew when to be stern or when to kind of step in and exercise his authority, but he was likable, and that's important to me. I feel like that's important. There's a lot of coaches that just say, well, it doesn't matter, they don't have to like you, you just have to respect you. I think that's not true. Like people have to like you, and respect comes with that. And so he was just really good at that. I think he was a general that garnered the respect of his players, and, you wanted to work hard for him just because of that demeanor that he carried.
How about Coach Schottenheimer?
Marty was one of the smartest coaches I've ever been around. His versatility as a coach. So I think anybody that knows him knows that he's a motivator. If you watch his his football life or whatever, like it motivates you just watching it. Like his speeches, and I mean, he make you want to run through a brick wall. But the thing I respected about him was his ability to not just, motivate you to run through the brick wall, but he could teach you how to get through the wall once you got there. Like he knew how to coach every position, and he was highly involved in the program, and again, like I said, he knew most everything that you needed to know. So he was a smart coach and also a highly motivational coach.
And you mentioned Joe Gibbs. We've had Coach Gibbs on this show, and his faith obviously is at the center of who he is as a coach. But what were some of the things that you learned from Coach Gibbs?
I think just the type of leader that you would want to be. From my perspective as a man of God, I think he showed great balance. So he was not just concerned about developing you as an athlete or a professional, but also as a man of God. I think we had like 3 chaplains. There was a chaplain that was specific to, traveling with the team. There was one that ministered to the coaches. And then there was another one that was available at all times. Like he'd be in the building throughout the week. And, at lunchtime, you may go sit down and have a short study with them, or you could, schedule time to meet with them and just talk. And his care for your spiritual well-being was unlike, any other coach I had been around. And again, that garners respect. And he led with integrity. So, again, they were all different, but there were so many good things that you could take for all of them. And that wasn't the only coaches I had. I had guys like, Steve Mariucci, who was like the coolest players coach you could ever have. So I had a lot of good coaches with amazing traits.
That's great. Vernon Fox is joining us here on Sports Spectrum. You mentioned Coach Gibbs. I want to ask you specifically about one season. And I didn't really have a plan to ask you about this until I just did a little research. And I remember that 2007 season with the Washington Redskins, and being on that team, there had so many highs and lows. And that was the death, I think, of Sean Taylor. I've talked to Lorenzo Alexander and Ryan Clark and a few others about Sean rallying to make the playoffs. Coach Gibbs at the center, like you mentioned, leading you. What stands out from that particular year, 2007?
I think at the depth of it, obviously, that was a major moment in that season. Obviously losing Sean, and it was tough on the entire team, on the entire organization. But there were so many things that I consider. I remember that season started off great. We were playing really well, and then we had like this dip where things kind of just were shifty and not going the best. And then obviously it goes to tragedy and we lose Sean. But then I saw a team come together like I had never really seen. I've been a part of teams, for a long time, whether I'm coaching or playing. And, one of the best traits of a good team is their ability to unify and to play together in cohesiveness. And I saw a level of cohesiveness like I'd never seen before. And I think a lot of that was just us rallying together, emotionally, having gone through what we had gone through. But like you said, that team pulled together and, we went on a run at the end there and was able to make it to the playoffs. Ironic enough, out of 8 seasons, that was the one time I went to the playoffs. and we only lasted one game, but obviously that was a memorable season. And, it was my last season, coincidentally, with the team. So I definitely remember it well.
Well, you're 27, 28 years old, and you're going through the death of Sean Taylor and seeing him lose his life. And just wondering, spiritually, where were you at that point? Because I know Lorenzo told us on the show that was a moment for him where he had to do some soul searching in a lot of ways, and it helped draw him closer to God, just thinking about mortality and thinking about what had happened. I'm wondering what that process was like for you personally, to go through watching a teammate lose his life in the middle of the season at such a young age, and then maybe connecting or disconnecting or reconnecting with God.
Here's the background of that situation, and just that time in particular. The thing that I'm grateful for is that I was at a really solid space spiritually. I was actually operating in ministry at that point, and I was connected to a strong church during my time in Washington, and still, obviously connected to my home church here in Las Vegas. And I was at a stable place spiritually, but that year presented, some of the hardest challenges I'd ever been a part of. I lost Sean first, or we lost Sean. And then literally a month later, my brother-in-law was murdered. And then about 3 months later, my grandmother lost her battle to dementia. And so up until that point, like you said, I was about 27, 28 years old. I really hadn't lost anybody close to me in my life. Like, you'd experienced death before, but no one that's immediately connected to you. Yeah. And I had 3 back to back to back. And so I really had to dig down deep. And I believe my faith was the catalyst for giving me the strength to endure during that time, and really just to kind of look inside and just, figure out that, our reliance upon Jesus for strength and everything that we need to endure through this life, was really relevant to me during that time.
Vernon Fox is joining us here on Sports Spectrum. Tell us your story of faith. Tell us how you became a Christian and kind of when the Lord became real to you.
I grew up in a Christian home, so I was exposed to the things of God at a very early age. During my elementary years, there was about 4 years that I went to a Christian school. And so, again, it was being, continuing to perpetuate in my life. And I loved God, just as a young man. I just loved the things of God. I loved the Bible. And when I got about 16, 17, I was like every other teenager, just kind of hungry to explore and figure out life. And I actually graduated really young. So when I went off to college, I was 17 for half of my freshman college year. And I made up in my head, this was my little agreement with myself. Like, man, I'm going to experience life. I'm going to have some fun. I'm away from home. Nobody's here to make me go to church or do any of those things. And I quickly realized that God had a leash on my life, and that his plans for me were closely connected to me staying in a particular vein and not getting too far outside of myself. So I tried to have fun. I tried to do what everyone else was doing, and it just didn't work. I always felt uncomfortable. God would always reel me back in. And I met a guy on my team to this day. He's one of my best friends. And he was a believer. He was 18 years old. He was a virgin. He was in a relationship. He, was loved the word of God, understood the word of God, and we were different. He was a Armenian guy from Clovis, California. Like, we were different in so many ways, but God connected us, and we started having Bible studies, and it was just, he and I and one other guy at first, and then it grew, and then we just started, having influence on the team and doing these weekly Bible studies. And then I got involved in FCA because of him, and God just kind of reeled me back in, and I recommitted my life at 18 years old. And man, I just started running in the direction of the things of God, and, far from perfect, but I had a strong desire to serve God. And when I left college, I was just determined that I didn't want to allow the NFL to taint me. I was afraid of, all of the stories of, what it could do to you and how it could be such a negative influence. And so I just really needed to grab a hold of God, and the way that God really kind of pulled me in on an intimate level was a way that I would have never selected. But what happened was, after a successful college career, I was projected to be a 3rd or 4th round draft pick. And I did not get drafted. And it was one of the worst feelings in my life. And probably just because it tore down my pride. It just ripped me open, because I was used to experiencing success and feeling like, I was the man. And God needed me to see that I wasn't the man, that everything I had experienced and all the success that I would experience would be because of his grace, his mercy, and because of his gifts and his favor. And so God used that moment to pull my heart closer to him, because my reliance level shifted from being self-reliant to being God-dependent. It was like, God, if this is going to happen, it's going to be you. And little did I know, that was the catalyst for just drawing me closer to God than I'd ever been. And then, within a matter of a year, I met my wife, and she was on the same path. And, we were like-minded and equally yoked and running for God. And so it just went from there.
Today's Sports Spectrum show is presented by Ronald Blue Trust. We love what Ronald Blue Trust stands for. Financial planning professionals offering comprehensive financial planning and investment management services based on biblical principles to individuals and families across the U.S. who are beyond the debt problem stage but want to be good stewards of their wealth. Do you want to be good stewards of your wealth? 35 years of experience is what we're talking about here with Ronald Blue Trust, and they work from as high a level as professional athletes and coaches to the common person like myself. And they can answer questions, they can help you along on your financial journey, and they can really help you map out a portfolio that can help you experience clarity and confidence and leave a lasting legacy when it comes to your wealth management. Ronald Blue Trust. We love them. We think you will too. Check them out at ronblue.com for all of your questions and concerns regarding your finances. Ronald Blue Trust, ronblue.com. Do you have a welcome to the NFL story that you can share? Do you have a moment where you were like, oh my goodness, okay, this is different. This is the NFL. This isn't college anymore.
Yeah, I probably have a bunch of them, to be honest, but one in particular that I'll never forget, and this was my first NFL game. So after I had made the team, I was a backup strong safety behind Rodney Harrison, and I was playing for the San Diego Chargers at the time, and we were playing in Cincinnati, and Rodney Harrison was the starter. He went out with an injury, and so I get to go in the game. So first NFL game, like I'm actually on the field playing. I just expected to run down on a couple kickoffs and, just get my feet wet. So I'm in the game playing. And, I remember he was Chad Johnson at the time, Chad Ochocinco. I'm playing against those guys. And I rush off the edge on a strong safety blitz, and the running back is Corey Dillon. Now I'm 5'10" at the time. I'm probably, 205 or something. I mean, he's probably 225, and I come off the edge, and he gets underneath my pads and literally just like lifts me off the ground, dips me on my back, lays into me, and gives me kind of one of those, welcome rookie type of talks. And I'll never forget that, because I thought to myself, like, all right, this is going to be tough. This ain't going to be like, because I was used to just, rushing in there, and I just run through the running back, run him into the quarterback. No, that wasn't happening. So I got a good wake-up call that day.
Well, Rodney Harrison, first of all, really great player. Corey Dillon, really great player. Chad Ochocinco, really great player. So it's interesting that those three guys all kind of played a part in that first NFL game for you. How hard, you talked about transitioning away. So many players, the NFL retires them. They don't get to retire on their own terms. And that's kind of what happened with you, right? Because you were only 30 years old. You said the call stopped, the text stopped, and all that. What was transitioning away like? Because I believe you started your high school career coaching in 2013. Your last game was 2009. So there's a 4-year period there of adjustment, of pivoting, like we've all been doing in 2020, and of figuring out what's next. What was that transition like for you?
It was really tough. Kind of the backstory on my career actually coming to a halt. In my last season in 2009, I was released literally probably 5 minutes before the last cutoff time for cuts. So I thought I was on the team. I thought I had got, I made the team again, and they literally called me. So if cut time was 3 p.m., like they called me at like 2:55. I was like, hey, come on over. And I'm like, oh, are you kidding?
Man.
So I go over, I get released, and, at that time, it's a business thing. Like I was a player that had been playing for 7 seasons. I was a little more expensive than some of those rookie guys they had. They could get 2 rookies for the price of me and just kind of plug them in all the spots I played. And that's kind of what happened. And so I went on this trek. I worked out for about 6 teams over the next 2 to 3 months. And then Denver inevitably re-signs me in the last quarter of the season due to an injury. And so I come back, and at the end of that season, they sit me down and they say, okay, we appreciate you coming back, and, you were effective, and, all this stuff, and, we're going to re-sign you. And I asked the question, I said, why? And they're like, what do you mean why? I'm like, what's going to be different? Like, I had a strong training camp. Like, what's going to be different this time if I come back? I'm going to be the odd man out. You're bringing all of these players back. You know, the player that got injured, he's going to be healthy. Like, I am going to once again be in the same situation. You know, do you foresee a different result? And they was just like, wow, that, you know, hey, no one's ever put it like that. We kind of see where you're going, but what's your plan? I'm just like, put me back in free agency. Give me a chance to go somewhere where I actually have a chance to make a team. So for a long time, I felt horrible, like, this is my fault. You know, I chose this, and here's my result. But God just showed me again that was his plan all along. And it was tough. You know, I trained for a year. Like, I was ready to go. I was in tip-top shape. I was training like I was in training camp with the team. I was working out twice a day. I was healthy. I felt just like I was ready to go. And the phone never rang. And, you know, God started giving me peace about the fact that it was over. And so I started just trying to figure it out. But I'll be honest, I stayed away from football. Like, I wouldn't even play fantasy football. I didn't want to watch football. It was too tough to go through that. And so I certainly didn't plan on coaching. That just wasn't in my plans. But I started experimenting with some things and doing some things. But I'll be honest, it was probably a good year and a half that I was in a bad mental space. It started out with me going to the gym, working out twice a day, doing field work, to where I'd walk in the gym and I just like would walk right back out and be like, why am I here? And I fell into a dark space, you know, and I went through some depression. And if it were not for, you know, God's strength, and also my wife was phenomenal during this time. She just kind of backed off and let me process the moment. And she said something to me that, you know, to this day, I highly respect. She's a hairstylist, and she's been doing it for, you know, almost 20 years. And it's a passion of hers. And she said to me, she goes, the way I'm able to empathize for you and understand where you are is if someone just came to me tomorrow and just said, you know, you can no longer do this. It's over. And she's just like, that's kind of what you're going through. And so we kind of just had a funeral for my career. Like, we just treated it like what it was. Like, I had to go through a grieving process. And I think God was a big part of just helping me to get through that.
Yeah, the NFL does a great job with their player engagement programs on trying to equip their players for post-NFL life. But there's still really nothing that can prepare you for taking something away that you've been doing for 20 plus years and suddenly saying, nope, no more. There really isn't anything that can prepare you for that. You just kind of have to go through that, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's a mental thing that is really difficult to prepare for. And to be honest, this is why one of the passions I have is to supersede kind of what those ordinary resources have been for players, you know, where, you know, exposing them to career opportunities and, you know, things like that. Like, I really have built a curriculum that not only digs into those aspects of developing yourself and, you know, taking advantage of your leverage and all of these things, but the emotional aspect of it as well is preparing yourself for that part of it. And yeah, it's I don't really know how. It's kind of like people that say, we'll have kids when we're ready. You know, we're not ready to have kids. You're never going to be ready. Like,
that's right. Yeah.
The change that they bring in your life is nothing that you really can plan for. You can have money in the bank. You can, you know, have a good job, but it changes everything about you. And so, yeah, it's just a change you got to go through. And every guy that I've ever known, whether they even chose to walk away from the game, you know, they still go through that grieving process.
Yeah. This has been great. Thanks so much for joining us today, Vernon. Last question. I'm curious what the Lord has shown you and taught you in 2020 post your decision to leave coaching, because everything then just happened, right? Between the pandemic and racial justice and all of these conversations, the divisions, the politics, everything going on. What's the great lesson the Lord has impressed upon your heart this year in 2020?
I think Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 kind of says it best. You know, that there is a need for us to trust God like never before, and not lean into our own understanding, because, you know, my ways are certainly not God's ways. And the way I see things and the plans that I even make for myself are not the important aspects of this life. But, you know, as scripture says, many are the plans in a man's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. And, you know, we really just have to trust him. And when leaning not unto our own understanding, we got to acknowledge him in his ways, and he directs our path. And so I think everybody's looking for their path now. It's just like, where do I go? Where do I go? And there's no other source to go through other than God. And so, you know, I'm while there's so many losses and transitions and tough spots that this year has taught us, there have been some great lessons I've learned also. You know, God has slowed me down. He's refocused me. He's recalibrated my priorities. And so there are a lot of good things that I can take away from it as well. But, you know, I've had my moments of fear where I'm just like, what's next? Like, okay, this was the wrong time to make a change. Yeah. And God is saying, no, I could see all things. I knew what was up ahead, and I got you. So I'm just learning to just lean into him and just trust him through it all.
That's awesome. He is Vernon Fox. Vernon, thank you, brother. This is great. Really awesome conversation, and let's get you back on again sometime. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed this time.
And many thanks to Vernon Fox for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. I really enjoyed that conversation. We actually spent another 15 or 20 minutes when the interview was over just talking about different projects that he's working on. And he's a great guy, man of God, husband, father, son, brother, former NFL player, and someone who just wants to preach the gospel and encourage others. You got to follow him on Instagram. That's where he is, Vernon Fox III. So Vernon Fox and then the number 3 right there on Instagram. And he's sharing a lot of inspiration and encouragement there. One of the recent posts says, success doesn't come to you, you go to it. He's also sharing a lot of Instagram lives and opportunities to talk about Jesus right there on Instagram. So give Vernon Fox a follow at Vernon Fox III. Thanks to Vernon for joining us today on the show. We also thank our sponsors and partners, Ronald Blue Trust, for all of your financial concerns and wealth management needs. We trust them. You should too. Ronald Blue Trust. You can reach them at ronblue.com. That's their website, ronblue.com. Thank you again for tuning into the program today. I want to direct you to our website, sportspectrum.com, and our email address, jason@sportspectrum.com, if you want to reach us here at the Ministry of Sports Spectrum. Again, my email is jason@sportspectrum.com. Do us a favor, would you too, as you listen on a podcast, whatever app you're listening to this show on, click that subscribe button. That way you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. 600 plus episodes, all at your fingertips. If you subscribe right now, whether it's Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast, Sports Spectrum is available and there. Click that subscribe button. And lastly, want to tell you about the Sports Spectrum Podcast Network. So it's not just this show. This show is the flagship show of what has now grown into the Sports Spectrum Podcast Network. So we got all sorts of shows. We got shows hosted by former Major League Baseball all-star players like Matt Holliday, and a show called Table 40 that he hosts with his wife, Leslie. We have a new show called Recalibrated, which is fantastic, speaking to the ladies, telling you really these stories, these untold stories, hosted by Mallory Brown, who's the wife of former NFL running back Donald Brown. And Mallory leads our women's ministry at our parent company here at Sports Spectrum, and she's dynamite. And she's going to bring you some amazing conversations with some women in and around the world of sports, specifically wives to NFL and former NFL players. Now, there'll be a lot of conversations with different people, but that's really a focus, is on talking to the wives, who are the true heroes in many of these athletes' lives. And so, guys, tell the ladies, go check out the Recalibrated podcast out right now. Brand new episodes with Mallory Brown. It launched November 19th, and it is out now as part of the Sports Spectrum Podcast Network. Thanks again for tuning in today, guys. We love you, and we'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum. My name's Jason Romano. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.